In this video, we're going to discuss using the Events tab to search your database and find your events. So we're going to start off in our web UI and head over to the Events tab at the top. And this is where we can see all of the live data streaming into SEM as it comes in and gets parsed by the connectors we just set up. So let's have a look around this interface before we talk about it too deeply. On the very left side, we see we have a list of filters and filter groups over here. This is out-of-the-box defaults. So they're broken up into different categories called filter groups. This is the bold text top row here. And each of these lines below that are individual filters. Now, filters exist to simply parse this stream of all events from everywhere down into a more usable format based on criteria that you provide. And obviously, we provide quite a few of these out of the box. Okay, we'll create a separate video later on how to do a deeper dive on filters and do advanced configuration and editing and delete and stuff like that. For now, we'll leave it at that. But let's have a look at a few of these filters and I'll let you know why they're important. So obviously the one we care about most is going to be all events, right? This is basically the non-filter filter. This is a filter with no criteria or conditions on it. So this is a stream of literally every event coming into SEM as it comes in. Below that we have SEM internal events. This is useful for diagnostics or troubleshooting or just seeing what your SEM is up to. So you'll notice that this limits our scope quite a bit, and every event name we see here starts with the word internal. Any event in SEM that starts with internal is basically an internally generated event that comes from SEM and applies to SEM. So you can use this particular filter to find things like agents going offline and coming back online. You can see connectors starting and stopping. You can see internal stats like internal commands that were run recently. You can see this manager monitor info, which is basically an hourly print of all of the different database and partition sizes, queue sizes, etc. So it's very useful for a lot of diagnostics and just making sure your SEM is working properly. It's also very useful to find error messages and things like that. Below that, we have one here called New Unmatched Connector Data, which you don't currently have, which is good, because generally you don't want to see anything in this filter. What the New Unmatched Connector Data filter is for is if you're sending data to your SEM that's getting parsed by a connector somewhere, there is a chance that that data, that particular event even, isn't getting parsed properly. Okay, so it could be that you have the wrong connector configured, but it's trying to read it anyway. It could be that the manufacturer decided to introduce a new event that we haven't coded into our connector yet, and it's not able to parse that particular string of text. Okay, there's a few different reasons why events don't get parsed like that. But suffice to say, if you see anything under this new unmatched connector data filter, you're probably going to want to do a couple things. First thing is to make sure your connectors are up to date. We do connector revisions constantly. We're introducing connectors all the time. So it's possible that this has already been identified and resolved with a newer connector revision. To do that, you can pop under the settings and verify that you are automatically updating or just do a manual connector update via this updates tab at the bottom. If your SEM has web access, you will probably want to leave all these automatic updates on, both the allow automatic updates for your agents as well as the connector updates. This way it will check itself every 24 hours and make sure there's no new revisions of the connectors out there. If it is, they will update itself automatically. You can also just force a one-time update now by clicking on that link. And it should say it was started and eventually it will successfully updated your connectors. Okay, that would be the first step. Assuming that didn't work and you're still seeing unmatched data here, the next step is simply going to be raise a case with our support team and let them know that you're getting unmatched data, and they will walk you through the process of collecting a report that contains those unmatched events, getting over to them, and they will have that sent over to the connectors team who will make the appropriate revisions to that particular connector. Okay, last filter we'll look at is going to be this rule activity filter. This one is very useful for rules when you configure them with your SEM. So obviously the rules are there for correlating events and issuing an appropriate action. But this rule activity filter is here to identify which rules have fired, when they fired, what the names of the rules were, what the parameters were, etc. So it's very useful to see what your rules engine is up to, what's been firing recently, and what's firing frequently. And you can use that to gauge how many you're firing, use it to troubleshoot, lots of different things you can use this for. Okay, now that's out of the way, let's go to this middle section. Right at the top, we can see that all of our live data is streaming. You can see new events stream in real time. That's because the live mode is enabled by default. If I were to stop this, it would stop the stream of the flow here, and I would be able to scroll down, have a closer look at it without it jumping out of my way. And you'll see on the top left that it continues to increment a number up here. This is all the new events that have come in after I turned off the live mode, so we know we're still getting data. Let's turn that back on and we're back to real time. I can click on any of these events. It's going to pull out the sidebar, which is the detail pane, and we can see all of the details of this particular event. Now, when an event comes into SEM, goes through the parsing process, it goes through the connector, which parses it into the standard SEM format. And this is what the standard SEM format looks like. It's basically taking the raw text and breaking it up into different fields that are indicated by this bold text here. So let's have a look at some of the more important fields that are common between all SEM events, just to make sure you have an understanding of what they are, and so you know what to look for when you're searching for your data, etc., building queries and rules and such. Start off at the top, event type. This is just the category of the event. This is pretty obvious, right? This is a UDP traffic event. There's hundreds of other possible event types, right? All sorts of things. But that's the general category of the event. Event info is just a quick summary of the event. If you looked at the raw event, you would see maybe a 1 or 2 sentence summary right at the top of what's in that event. That's probably what's going to show up under this event info here. It's just a quick, short summary of what this event's about. Now here's where it breaks off a little bit. We have detection IP. We also have another one called insertion IP. They're both telling us the source of the event, but in a different way. So let's elaborate on that just a little bit. This detection IP, and when we talk about detection IP versus insertion IP, this also applies to detection time versus insertion time, wherever that's at. There it is. Okay, same principle here. So detection basically means this is the IP address or hostname that was stamped on that source event. So when you look at the raw log file, this is the source address. Okay, if I looked at this raw syslog file, we would see that very easily. If I looked at something coming from a Windows machine, like our patch server here, this is the host name, or FQDN in this case, that was stamped on that original Windows security event. Okay, now how it differs from insertion IP is you'll notice here for this Windows event that insertion IP is also the patch host name or the patch FQDN. And that makes sense because what the insertion is saying is this is the IP or host name that inserted this event into the database. And they're usually the same thing, because in this case they are, because it's an agent event, whereas this came from the same machine that it was inserted from, because the agent itself is doing the inserting. So these fields are identical. But if I were to look at one of these syslog events coming from our ASA, you'll notice that the IP of the detection IP and the insertion IP are not the same. Okay, the insertion IP is actually the host name of our SEM itself. What this means is, because this device doesn't have an agent on it, the actual insertion of the data after it goes through the parsing process is done from the appliance itself. Okay, the connectors that are parsing this data are stored on the appliance, so the data comes from this IP address to the SEM in its raw form to the SEM appliance, and it gets parsed through the connectors at the appliance level and inserted directly into the database. So the appliance itself is doing the inserting. Okay, this is almost getting to a trivia level of knowledge here, but it can be useful when you're building rules and things like that. So I want to differentiate between the two. And of course, this applies to detection time and insertion time as well, whereas detection time is the time that was stamped on the original event, and insertion time was the time it was actually inserted into the database. Important note on that is this is actually a very good troubleshooting or performance indicator. You'll notice that the time here is synced up down to the second. That's not always the case. Under normal conditions, your SEM is going to be very near real time or real time, right? So these two should be very close together, maybe just a few seconds apart, and that's optimal. But if you notice any performance issues, or you see your drift here increasing, so the detection time is getting further away from the insertion time, possibly minutes, possibly hours, that's a pretty good indication that your SEM is no longer able to keep up with its real-time performance, and something is dragging down its performance, or it's not spec'd high enough. and you may need to consider giving it more resources because it's simply not able to maintain the level of traffic that you're sending it. Okay, that's a pretty good indicator of losing your real-time status. So watch out for that if you're noticing any performance hiccups. Just a few more here. Tool alias, this one's pretty important. This is the name of the connector that inserted this data. So this is the one that parsed the data. This Cisco ASA and iOS connector we configured in a previous video. We can easily identify the source of this event by looking at the tool alias. If I were to go to one of these Windows events, we can see this is coming from the Windows security log. Okay. Next up is the provider SID. This one's also very useful. This will essentially contain any event IDs or error IDs that come associated with this particular event. So in this case, this is a Windows event from the security log, as we can see here, and it has an event ID of 5058. So if you ever want to search for a particular event ID, that's the field you want to use. And let's see here. The only other field we really care about at this point, the only other common field we care about is going to be extraneous info, and that's literally what it sounds like. This is the miscellaneous field. This is where any data that's from an event that doesn't have a particular other field that it should belong to ends up. Okay, so this is all the random stuff that really doesn't belong anywhere else, which can be very useful depending on the data source or the event type. It could contain very useful data, and it's probably something you'll be using in your queries fairly frequently. Okay, so with that out of the way, there's going to be one more event ID, or sorry, field name that I want to bring up here. That we don't actually see right now, and this is one that's generally going to show up for any of your networking events, such as UDP traffic audit. So the reason we don't see it here is because it's marked as false or it's blank. This detail pane is not going to show you any fields that have a blank value or a null value, right? So the particular field in question I'm talking about is called the isThreat field. The field name I'm talking about is called the isThreat field name. If I look on the left side under security, there is a all threats events filter over here, and that's the particular field it's looking for. Now this ties all the way back into the feature of SEM, the threat intelligence feed, as it's called. And that feature basically allows us to monitor your network traffic, such as your UDP, your TCP, your ICP traffic coming from your firewall, your switches, and essentially correlate it with an open source of known bad actors. So this open source is pulled via the threat intelligence feed every 24 hours, incorporated into SEM, and it compares all your network traffic with that. So if you have someone going to a flagged external site somewhere, you're going to get a little field that says isThreat equals true. And you can do that, you can monitor those with this all threat events filter, or incorporate it into your rules, in your reports, in your queries, etc., to find those critical network events that you might want to take a closer look at to make sure people aren't going where they shouldn't be and they're not presenting any security issues for you, right? So we don't have any of those events in this particular SEM because there's not a lot going on in our lab. But if I flip over to the SEM demo website, there's actually a few events in here we can look at. So if you look at all threat events, and this is actually accessible to anybody. In case you're wondering, you can go to sem.demo.solarwinds.com. And this is essentially an open source full SEM implementation that anyone can use. Okay, so if I look at all threat events, I see we have a lot of TCP traffic audit events. And if I click at any of these and look at the details, there is a isThreat field name, and it is marked as true. So that is basically the condition that forces this event into this filter, is this one field here. So all of these TCP traffic audit events have been flagged as going to a known bad actor IP address, host name, or domain, things like that. Okay, which basically means I should probably take a look at who's generating this activity and go have a talk with them or see if their machine is compromised, etc. Let's flip back to our SEM, and that's the basics right there. Now, obviously, we want to use this tab for searching. This is what this whole discussion is about. So we have a couple options to do that. Once I get the data flowing into SEM and I find something I want to, or I think of something I want to search for, I got basically two options. I can use this live filter box to filter this live data and see if it's come in recently and just filter this stream into my own ad hoc filter, if you will. So for example, I could search for a particular account name. Okay, it'll filter out all the data from all events down to just the ones that has this highlighted text right here. Okay, I could search for an IP address. Even a partial will generate a match for us. Okay, so I can search for event types. I can search for literally any data that you see in any of these fields here. Not just these 4 columns, as it might appear, but it actually is filtering the entire event, all of these different filters for whatever you're looking for. Let's try user login event. Okay, so we'll see all of our login events coming from our patch server and our ASA device. Now the important thing about the filters box is it's looking for a contiguous string of text. This isn't a very advanced query. You don't use ands or operators or anything like that, or groups, anything like that as of yet. But this is basically a keyword search. So it's looking for a contiguous string of text. If I keep typing, you'll see it keeps highlighting the text. But I can't do a space here and type something else that might apply to it, like our account name. Okay, it doesn't quite work that way because it's not a joined string of text. Pretend that this filter box has invisible quotes around it, and you get the idea. But even with that, I can literally start in the middle of a word, and it will still pick it up as long as that text is contiguous and joins together. Okay, so just an important note on that. Now, this live filter box is only limited to what I see in this filter, and as you can see on the left side, the default cap for all the filters and search history is going to be 10,000 events. This 9,999 plus is actually 10,000 by default. Okay. Now the reason we do that is for memory consideration. So right now we're showing all 10,000 of the latest items, and there's essentially a limit of 10,000 per each filter by default. The reason we do that is for memory, right? All of these events come at a memory cost when they're displayed in the console in these filters. So we have to limit that in some fashion so your SEM memory requirement isn't enormous, and it remains usable. And that's the cap that we chose. And that goes for your historical searches as well. However, both the individual filter limit as well as the historical search limit can be adjusted via the settings tab. If I were to go to the settings button here and go to, let's see, event limits. There it is in front of my face. If I go to event limits, I can set both the filter limit and the search limit however I want to. Now keep in mind there are big old warning boxes on both these tabs indicating that increasing this number is going to have a performance impact. That's why it's limited in the first place. So you only really want to do this if you have a real need for it and you have a very well-spec'd SEM. Okay, otherwise this is probably something you don't want to mess with. It can really hinder performance if your SEM does not have a lot of juice. Okay. With that said, this live filter is going to show us the most 10,000 recent events. So what if the event I'm filtering for is older than 10,000? If I have a very active SEM, that may not go back very far. That's why we have this show results from history option. So let's say I try a keyword search such as maybe admin. Okay, and I scroll down and it doesn't go back in time quite as far as I need it to. It only goes back 30 minutes. So I want to do this show results from history option. Here I have a very familiar time frame picker here. Looks very much like the Orion time frame picker. I can choose any of these time frames or just build my own custom query, custom time frame. So for example, I could do last day, search on that. It is going to actually search my database and pull up to that default of 10,000 events from right now to the last 24 hours. Okay, turns out there's only 374 of those events, but if there were a huge number, it would be capped at 10,000 unless I adjusted that setting like we talked about. Okay, and really the final thing you can do in the events tab is once you get your data filtered, or you've searched it, you filtered it using the the live filter box or the historical search or whatever to get it down to where the exact data sample that you want, you may want to get it out of here and either edit it elsewhere, trim it down, remove duplicates, or just have an external copy. So once I have this looking the way I want it, what I can do is click on this Export to CSV button. It's going to immediately export all of these 374 items to a CSV file. And this is what we see. So it is literally a CSV format. Each individual column represents a particular field name. So from here, I can very quickly look through all my events. I can delete columns that I don't care about. I can remove duplicate events, etc. But it is your data to play with at this point. Okay, and that concludes our discussion on searching with the Events tab. Thanks for your attention. We'll see you next time.